Welcome to this Bible prophecy study. Jesus said, "Now I tell you before it comes, that when it is come to pass, ye may believe that I am he." John 13, verse 19. The book of Revelation puts much of its message in word pictures, and we've tried to include a few visual aids. The illustrations used in these classes are often dramatized artist interpretations, and as such, are sometimes not exactly correct in every detail. Revelation chapter 17. This chapter is part of the third set of 7 chapters in chapter 22, which covers the end. This includes the wrath of God, the millennium, the battle of Gog and Magog, the final judgment, and heaven. Chapter 17. Babylon, the false church/commercial system. This is one of the most important chapters in Revelation, exposing and analyzing for us the relationship between the religious/commercial system and the government, or as John so aptly describes it, the fornication between the whore and the kings of the earth. This chapter is mainly background, giving us an historical analysis of God's view of the system, so we can understand how God sees it and why he so utterly destroys it in the 16th, 18th, and 19th chapters. Verse 1 and 2. And there came one of the 7 angels which had the 7 vials, and talked with me, saying unto me, Come hither, I will show unto thee the judgment of the great whore that sitteth upon many waters, with whom the kings of the earth have committed fornication, and the inhabitants of the earth have been made drunk with the wine of her fornication. The kings, the rulers of the earth, have committed fornication, in other words, letting themselves and their authority be used for material gain, and the inhabitants of the earth, which includes you and me, have been made drunk, meaning overcome by powerful emotion to the point of losing control over one's judgment, with the wine of her fornication. Those are the products, the fruits, the results that we consume today in our lifestyle as the results of the deals made by the rulers with the merchants. Materialism. In other words, the whore. Verse 3. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sit upon a scarlet-colored beast. This is the same beast described in chapter 13, full of names of blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. The Lord is showing us here that you have to drop out spiritually into the wilderness if you want to see clearly where the whore, the system of man, is really at. Verses 4 and 5. And John saw this woman arrayed in purple and scarlet color, those are traditional royal colors, and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls. Precious stones have always represented the power of every economic system, from the ancients' idols of gold and silver to today's currencies, which until the last part of the 20th century were backed by gold and silver. Having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. In case you don't know what to fornicate means, it means to unlawfully have intercourse. And here it means spiritual fornication with the devil, putting his kingdom, Babylon, the system, first in one's life and serving it instead of dropping out of it to serve God's kingdom, New Jerusalem, by learning his teachings and striving to do his will. As James said, Ye adulterers and adulteresses, know ye not that the friendship of the world, the system, Babylon, is enmity with God? Whosoever, therefore, will be a friend of the world, the system, is the enemy of God. James chapter 4, verse 4. Babel, or Babylon, was the first city man built after the flood. And later in this same chapter it says this woman, Babylon, is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth, which we'll read in verse 18. So Babylon represents the great worldwide age-old capitalistic commercial centers of materialism and commerce, the cities of man. Commerce and trade have always been factors that guide and influence, rule over kings and rulers and their decisions. In Revelation, there are two different women representing two different kingdoms. One, New Jerusalem, the kingdom of Christ, the church, the bride of Christ, as we studied about in chapter 12, and two, Babylon, the whore, the system, the kingdom of the devil. People are working for and building in one or the other. New Jerusalem is the glory of God, chapter 21, verse 11. But Babylon is the glory of man. Man's greatest achievements are his cities. That's what he brags about more than anything else, his big buildings, his big cities. They worship the works of their own hands, that which their own fingers have made. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 8. But we agree with the historian Arnold Toynbee, who said cities are man's festering sores on the body politic. The curse of civilization is its cities. They have always been the mother of all abominations of the earth, and it is these centers of commercialism that are responsible for all of man's wars, which are always fought for the love of money or economic purposes and power, the power of possession of other cities. From whence come wars and fightings? Come they not hence even of your lusts? James chapter 4, verse 1. It is these centers of industrialization based on the production of war goods and idols that have polluted not only the entire earth, air, and sea, but also the hearts, minds, and souls of all the inhabitants of the earth with the filthiness of her fornication. Man's idolatry pollutes everything. For the love of money, material things, is the root of all evil. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verse 10. Verse 6. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus. And when I saw her, I wondered with great admiration. The whore has two forms, religious and commercial, but it's really all the same, as they both go down for the love of money. In her religious form, she's been responsible for all the martyrs of history, and in her commercial form, for all the millions slain in war. As it says in chapter 18, verse 24, in her was found the blood of prophets and of saints and of all that were slain upon the earth. Verse 7. When John wondered at her, it means that he was astonished. The picture really flipped him out. So the angel said, Wherefore didst thou marvel? I will tell thee the mystery of the woman and of the beast that carrieth her, which hath the 7 heads and 10 horns. Notice that the angel said he would tell the mystery, not the answer. The answer has remained hidden until these final days, and it's now being revealed more fully because we are the generation that's going to need to know these things. Verse 8. First the angel tells him about the beast. The beast that thou sawest was, and is not, and shall ascend out of the bottomless pit and go into perdition. And they that dwell on the earth shall wonder, whose names were not written in the book of life, when they behold the beast that was, and is not, and yet is. Verse 9. And here is the mind which hath wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman sitteth. A beast in prophetic symbolism represents earthly government. Daniel's vision of the 4 great beasts arising from the sea in Daniel chapter 7 represented 4 kings and 4 kingdoms. Daniel chapter 7 verses 17 and 23. Was and is not and yet is means the beast existed in the past, the first 5 heads, was, and speaking of the 7th head in the future, is not, or as it says in the next verse, is not yet come. In other words, it will be in the future. And present, in 90 AD, yet is, meaning the 6th head, Rome, which was in power at that time. The 7 heads of the beast are 7 mountains. Mountains in prophetic symbolism represent great world kingdoms, whether bad or good. The ancient kingdom of Babylon during her world reign was called the Destroying Mountain, in Jeremiah 51, verses 24 and 25. And prophecy referring to Christ's earthly kingdom during the millennium calls it the mountain of the Lord's house, Isaiah 2, verse 2. These 7 mountains, then, are the 7 major world empires through which the beast has manifested himself and through which the whore, by sitting on top, a ruling position, has controlled the world. Verse 10, and there are 7 kings. 5 are fallen. At the time when this prophecy was given in 90 AD, 5 of the 7 major world powers that ruled over God's people had fallen. Egypt, Assyria, Babylon, Medo-Persia, and Greece. And one is. Rome was in power at the time of the prophecy and was the 6th head. And the other is not yet come. This is the final government of the Antichrist, the 7th. And when he cometh, he must continue a short space. This is the short reign of the Antichrist world government, only 7 years, according to Daniel 9:27. This is more fully explained in our class on Daniel chapter 9. Verse 11. And the beast that was and is not, even he is the 8th, and is of the 7, and goeth into perdition. This might possibly mean that before the Great Tribulation, before the abomination of desolation, the 7th empire will be in existence, but not yet completely the Antichrist empire, because its leader hasn't yet been fully possessed by the devil. Though he is the head or king of the 7th world government, he hasn't yet become the Antichrist. But at the point of the abomination of desolation, in the very middle of the last 7 years, leaving 3.5 years to go, he is fully possessed of the devil, and he becomes a different man, the Antichrist, with a different government, totally of the devil. Although it would be the very same head, the 7th head, it would now also become the 8th, and a new government. The 7th head, however, is already here, though not yet in full power. And it is world communism, which is already on the march and is already conquering the world. As the 7th head, it will be the basis of the Antichrist government, because it has all the attributes of that government which are described both in Revelation and Daniel. No other government ever has. The beast is red, so is communism. The red flag, red army, red square, etc. The most powerful and thorough dictators the world has ever seen have been communists. And the beast is going to be headed up by the greatest dictator of all history. The Antichrist will completely abolish every and all forms of traditional worship. Only communism has tried to do this. The beast will destroy the whore, the false religions of man, including capitalism, which communism is now working at. It is going to rule the entire earth, which has always been the loudly proclaimed goal of communism, and which they are fast accomplishing. Finally, in its pursuit of destroying all false religions, the prophecies predict that the beast will also try to stamp out the true church, which the Reds have tried to do in countries they've conquered. So if communism is not the 7th head, then we will have to wait until it passes and another government with exactly the same attributes arises to take its place, which is doubtful since there's not enough time left. Over the last 70 years, we've been hearing more and more the world's prophets promoting and pushing the concept of globalism, which is a milder way of saying the New World Order. The Western world, the first world, has been very conditioned against communism, so it's hard to visualize world communism under present conditions, but a war could change that. The second world is communism, and the third world rather likes the idea of communism, but they all rather like the idea of an economic new world order. That would, in effect, and literally be the rule of materialism, mammon, over the entire world. But even that would need a totalitarian dictatorship to enforce it. Verse 12. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. Since they had received no kingdom as yet in 90 AD, they couldn't have been on any of the first 6 heads, so they must all be on the 7th head. And if they are, then at least the basis of these 10 kingdoms must be here today. In his prediction of these 10 end-time kingdoms, the prophet Daniel said a little horn, or an 11th horn, rising after the 10 horns, will pluck up 3 of them by the roots, thus taking all of them over. This was covered in our class on Daniel chapter 7. The fact that these 3 kingdoms were plucked up by the roots, and the love of money is the root of all evil, could imply that not only military force but also an economic crash will be used to overthrow them. However, the conquest of the 3 horns or kingdoms does not mean that they no longer exist as separate kingdoms. The communists have been very good at letting conquered countries retain quite a bit of autonomy. So one of these 3 horns could even be the USA, presently the chief resistor to the Red Beast and communist world domination. The other 2 could even be Britain and West Germany. This is not a prediction, only a possibility. We will see. Verse 13. After the conquest of these 3 horns and the establishing of pro-Antichrist governments within their countries, they could indeed, as it says here in this verse, give their power and strength unto the beast, uniting with the beast to form the nucleus of the Antichrist kingdom. Whoever these 10 kingdoms are will become clearer within the next few years. Verse 14. These 10 horns shall make war with the Lamb, and the Lamb shall overcome them, for he is Lord of lords and King of kings, and they that are with him are called and chosen and faithful. When they try to wipe us out is when God's going to wipe them out. Verse 15. The whore in verse 2 sits upon many waters, which is interpreted for us in verse 15. The waters where the whore sitteth are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues, showing the oppressive weight of the system on its masses. Verses 16 through 18. And the 10 horns which thou sawest upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh and burn her with fire. And the woman, the whore, which thou sawest, is that great city which reigneth over the kings of the earth. Now we have said that the whore is the religious/commercial system. We could just as well have said she represented the economic system, because they are both worshiping the gods of mammon, money and materialism. Jesus himself said, no man can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon, worldly riches. That's Matthew chapter 6, verse 24. Let's face it, organized religion with all its money, buildings, and property is pretty well sold out to mammon worship. In fact, it plays quite a big role in the economic systems of all the Western countries. For instance, in the U.S., 1/4 of all privately owned land is reported to be owned by churchianity. And the Catholic Church, in the 20th century, was reputed to have greater income than all top 6 multinational corporations put together. It's not certain if these figures are still accurate, but it's very obvious that churchianity today is doing very well. The real religion of man has always been the love of money and worship of the works of his own hands. But in the ancient kingdoms, it was cleverly disguised in the form of supernatural religion. Even back then, materialism was the real God, and so-called religion was only the way the rich controlled the masses. In fact, the temple of God was often the place where they regulated all trade and commerce. Today, the God is still money, but education and science have replaced spiritual religion with intellectual religion. Together, the God of finance and the religion of education and science make up the modern whore of capitalism, the false worship system. And it is this whore of capitalism, religious and commercial, that really runs things, not the kings or government. For instance, in ancient Egypt, which through a dictatorship still allowed property to be privately owned, capitalism, Pharaoh appeared to be the foundation and fountainhead of all authority and power, but in actuality, authority rested somewhere else. Pharaoh claimed his authority from his religion, his whore, for the religion taught that Pharaoh was the living offspring of the sun god Ra, who also happened to be the national god of Egypt, and as such, Pharaoh was deserving of all Egyptians' allegiance under the penalty of law. The religion taught patriotism and nationalism, which is what kept Pharaoh in power. So actually, the religion was in control of the land, not Pharaoh. Just as today, the multinational international bankers, the high priest of today's whore of capitalism, control the government of today. They now also control the economies of the second and third world as well. Every great empire has used religion to control their masses. They all had compulsory state religions which taught obedience to the state and were enforced by law. In the ancient kingdoms, it was compulsory worship of a national god. Today, it's compulsory education, which teaches you nationalism, patriotism, and how to fit into your slot in the great national worship of money and materialism. So apparent has this religious influence and control been, the historian Toynbee said, if there's ever going to be a world empire, it will need a compulsory world religion to keep it in power. Why? Because brute force doesn't make a man a willing slave. He has to have something that captures his heart and mind, plays on his fears, his self-preservation instincts, etc., and instills a deep-seated patriotism in him so that he's willing to live, fight, and die for the state, the whore's beast. Hence, religion, or today, education. So as the prophecy says, the whore ruleth over kings, for they too have to submit to her if they want to keep their people in subjection. And the 10 horns shall destroy the whore. Will this destruction of America and the West finally bring an end to the false, exploitive, capitalistic religions of man? Well, almost, but not quite. In Daniel, it says the Antichrist government will destroy all forms of idolatry except for one, the abomination of desolation, or image of the beast. What communism will eventually do is merely replace many forms of false religion with the worship of one false religion, the worship of this abomination of desolation, or image of the beast. The whore of capitalism and abundance will be gone, but Babylon the Great will still be here, and it will so completely control the lives of people that Revelation 13 says no one will be able to buy or sell unless they've been branded with a number or chip in their forehead or hand, which will link them up to a worldwide credit system controlled by this image of the beast. So they will be literally joined to idols, as it says in Hosea chapter 4, verse 17, committing physical as well as spiritual fornication with the original Babylon the Great, in total bondage to the system. Yes, the communists are trying to destroy the whore of American capitalism, but they don't know how to do it. They think if they just burn down its buildings and execute its evil leaders and replace its false teachings with the correct and scientific teachings of Marxism, everything will work out all right. But they're going to end up right back where they started, only a lot worse. What natural man doesn't realize is that the system is spiritual. It's based on the big lie of selfishness, pride, and rebellion against God. And the only way to fight it is with the spiritual weapons of God's truth. Not just trying to change their minds, but hitting them where it really counts, in their hearts. Really changing people's spirits, bringing them out of the kingdom of darkness, Babylon the Great, and into the kingdom of light, New Jerusalem, the bride of Christ.